Hello students, welcome to our next video. This video is going to be about disease and disease-producing organisms, better known as pathogens. Okay, the things that are trying to kill us, but some of the stuff such as non-disease producing organism, microorganisms, so simple microbiology. So by any means, if you are excited about microbiology and think we're getting into everything, I'm going to disappoint you because we're not going to talk about everything, but we're going to talk about the basics, okay? Because it is very important to understand the basics of what microbiology is all about. So Manee is lurking in the background and he says, hello everybody. Probably not going to use you as much, okay, because thank goodness, but I will tell you, you are full of probably microorganisms because everything we touch around us has microorganisms living on them. So we're going to look at doing some definition of what it means for microbiology, but we're also going to talk about what the different type of diseases and what could cause the diseases within the body. So the first word that you definitely need to know in your book is disease. Okay, so when you see the word disease, definitely be thinking of what that definition medically is. Okay, so it is defined as any abnormalness of the anatomy, the structure, and the physiology, the function. Okay, so when we get sick, okay, or feel ill, that's when we're got something going on that would technically be classified as a disease. So any of the effects of the disease may be felt by the person or observed by others. Okay, obviously measuring the symptoms, so the signs and the symptoms is something we're definitely going to be focusing on within this chapter. Now, when you're studying disease or treating the disease, it's definitely important to understand that disease does fall under different categories. Okay, so again, what's causing the problem within the body? So you have infectious diseases, okay, so obviously we're going to talk a lot about those. So we think about, a certain virus, then of course affecting the whole world that we're going to be talking about a little bit within this videos. You have diseases that where the body is breaking apart, okay, degenerative diseases as they're called, okay, so it's just, it could be the brain, such as Alzheimer's, it could be the bones, this is an osteo type of disease. Now, nutritional disorders, so sometimes you might hear a disease also listed as a disorder. So you think of nutritional, you think obviously the lack of something, okay, so like a vitamin C causing scurvy, okay, something like that. There could be metabolic type of disorders, diseases. So those would be like hormone deficiencies, okay, so like a thyroid problems. And immune disorders, okay, so you think about immune disorders would be, of course, obviously anything that's affecting our immune system, the white blood cells either overworking or underworking. So always be thinking of hyper, excessive, and hypo, okay, when you're thinking about anything within the human body. Now, we talked a little bit in the last video about the neoplasms, okay, or plasms, which would be the tumors, okay, so that would be, again, that word can also mean new growth, okay, within the body. And then psychological disorders, okay, so these we'll talk more about in detail in chapters that we get to that relate to the nervous system, okay, so they kind of fall into that category of like any type of mental health disorders. That's what we'll be talking about into future videos. Now, when you think about the disease, so anything that's abnormal from the normal, okay, of the structure, okay, and the function, they're going to be causes of those diseases. So that's very important to be thinking of what could be causing the disease within the body. So that is important to help us to determine, we think of, diagnosing the disease, preventing the disease, and of course obviously the treatments that can come with the disease. So things such as your age and your gender, your hereditary, how you live, obviously, our lifestyle, for, bungee jumping, okay, going swimming with manatees can be very hazardous to your health, okay, I know that sounds sad. How that emotionally we are, mentally and physically, can cause changes throughout the body. And then if we have anything that's what they call pre-existing type of condition, that can of course obviously add to the problem. Now, some health specialists study that, and that's epidemiology. Okay, so the science known as epidemiology, it's a big fancy word, literally is just about collecting data in 3 different categories. disease. Now, the three different categories for epidemiology would be the incident rate. Okay, that's the rate of new diseases that are popping up. So kind of back to the COVID-19, okay, or when we think about it, they were like, okay, there's something happening in a very certain amount of time, okay, and they're keeping track of that. So think about the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. There's a prevalence rate. Now, the prevalence rate is the overall frequency that we see in any type of given group, because obviously we're starting to see it pick up throughout. And the mortality, okay, of course you hear that name, mortality, definitely that's what it means, is how many people have died from that certain type of disease. Okay, so that's important to think about those particular three categories. But that's how they're going to put, after they, again, put them in a category of what type of disease would this fall under, then they think of the statistics, okay, then that's going to add that to a certain category of, is it an epidemic? Is it an endemic, or as we know, unfortunately, with the Corona-19, it was a pandemic, okay? So that's going to tell us then of, like, how far is it spread? So an epi, okay, demic, okay, is many people in a certain region get that disease, okay? We're not going to get into numbers by any means, because this is a very simple microbiology, but obviously it has to be a certain threshold. An endemic, okay, is a disease considered in that area where it's lesser to extent, but it's more of a huger region. Okay, so you might think of an epic as being maybe like a city, and an endemic maybe being a whole state. Okay, and again, that's not precise by any means, according to CDC and places like that. That's just the general. A pandemic, which you already know, is the entire world. Okay, such as unfortunately like we saw, but there's been other diseases, okay, like the Spanish flu back in the day. We think about, conditions such as, AIDS, okay, there's tons of Ebola, you can the list kind of goes on. Okay, so definitely know, when you're thinking about disease, of how is it classified, and then they'll think of statistics, okay, and then how many people are definitely being affected. Now, after that, you get into talking about diagnosis, okay? So once you kind of have like the information and the data when it comes to diseases, and we're going to look at two different things, the symptoms and the signs. Okay, we're going to put those two together to actually give us an official name of the syndrome so we can truly classify it. So a symptom is what the patient feels, okay? So that's very important. You got to separate your signs and your symptoms, okay? Because before a patient can be truly treated, okay, a physician only can make a diagnosis, okay? So they're going to listen to a patient's symptoms, okay? So symptoms, so disease conditions experienced by the patient, such as they're saying, I'm having pain, I'm fatigued, I feel nauseous, okay? So a symptom is something the patient would be telling you. A sign is what the physician is going to look for a sign, okay, a sign being a rash, okay, on the skin, or maybe it's a fast heart rate, something that a physician is going to measure. It's very objective, okay. Subjective would be symptoms, what the patient is telling you. Objective are going to be the signs. Okay, got to be able to figure out to separate the two of them. So I always think about, I'm looking at a patient at their signs, they're telling me their symptoms. So when you put those two together, that's where you would get a syndrome. Okay, that's where the official diagnosis would kind of come in at that moment. Then they would kind of give you a prognosis based upon the data. Now, it can even get a little bit further with classifications such as acute. Okay, so acute is not cute by any means. Okay, so acute is a disease that is very severe, usually starting out, but then it lasts for usually a very short amount of time. Okay, so acute happens suddenly, but does not last long term. Now, between that and chronic's at the other end, so this would be acute and chronic, is one that kind of in the middle is called subacute, in some textbooks, where it's kind of maybe it's lasting a little bit longer than chronic, okay, but not as long, and it heals and does not get to a chronic condition. So chronic literally means these diseases are usually less severe, but they're continuous and they last for a long time. So think about a chronic condition. It can start off acute, but eventually be diagnosed as chronic because it will not go away. Okay, so maybe you end up with high blood pressure one day because you're taking a test and you're freaking out, and then the next day your blood pressure goes back down to normal. That would be an acute symptom. But then you would think of a high blood pressure that lasts a long time, and you have to take medications for, because usually medications is more of a chronic condition that you want to take medications for. Any means, obviously, refer to your physician and your pharmacist about that. Now, prognosis, like I already mentioned, prognosis is telling you when we gathered everything what could be happening. Now, as far as treatments, I'm not getting into treatments as far as Eastern medicine and Western medicine, but most textbooks, including this one, talk about the different means that you could to help with the prognosis that you got. Anything from, again, alternative medicines, you can get into acupressure, acupuncture, to massage therapy, to obviously biofeedback, to chiropractic, more natural approaches, or more of the true Western medicine itself. The biggest thing we definitely want to always be thinking about as healthcare professionals is prevention, okay? If we can prevent from even getting sick, and the biggest way is wash your flippers, okay? But in our case, wash your hands, okay? We've learned pretty quickly that washing the hands alone, it really helps to ward off a lot of these diseases. Now, I'm not going to get into the CDC, but definitely, understanding the CDC, based out of Atlanta, Georgia originally, is responsible for protecting and improving the health of the American public at home and, of course, abroad. It was established back in 1946, and then kind of fast forward, obviously we know that the CDC is constantly working to give guidelines and recommendations of ways to hopefully prevent these diseases, cut down on the prevalence of them, but also suggestions and guidelines for us to follow to keep us safe as in our daily work schedule. So now that brings us to the word of infectious disease. Okay, so infectious disease is an invasion by any disease-producing microorganism. Okay, now the word organism means anything that has life. Okay, sorry, Manee. Does not include you. Micro, of course, means very small. Okay, so we think about all the stuff we really can't see outside of maybe using a black light or a microscope, things like that. Although most microorganisms are harmless, okay, many are very beneficial, there are some that are kind of parasitic, okay, like parasites. They live on or near a host, but when they produce a disease within the body, that's when they're called a pathogen. Okay, so remember, not all microorganisms are pathogens. Okay, there's a lot of these microorganisms we're going to talk about here in a few minutes that you definitely are going to need. So if it's pathogenic, okay, meaning an invasion into the body somehow by these microorganisms that cause you to be sick, that is classified as an infection. Okay, so remember, microorganisms usually cannot be seen with the naked eye, okay? I mean, microscopic, unless you have like, x-ray vision type, you're usually not going to be able to see them, okay? So that's where we think about microbiology. This is where it's really coming into play, okay? Now, an infection, again, can be a local problem, okay? Again, those signs and symptoms coming together showing that I have, an infection in my body, and it could be systemic, meaning it could affect the whole body. So, your infection can be localized or the whole body, okay, more than one area. Of course, there's ways to transmit that from person to person, such as obviously, again, if we sneeze on something, someone touches it, or we sneeze on that person. So it could be directly or indirectly. There can be vectors. Okay, a vector is an insect such as mosquito that carries the disease from person to person. Okay, so modes of transmission of these infectious diseases can be, again, person to person, animal to person. Okay, so just kind of know that as you're thinking about these type of diseases. And when back to chapter 1 in most textbooks, that first video, kind of remember these barriers that we talked about. So the skin, okay, the next couple videos we're going to be talking a lot about the skin, the different layers, these mucosis, talked about that in the last video. The mucosous membranes are barriers that hopefully prevent germs from getting in, but if those barriers are breached, okay, such as someone broke into your house, okay, the robbers can come in to steal the stuff and make a mess. Okay, the exact same thing, of course, applies to the body. I'm not going to get into this particular video talking about how these general defenses we have, the immunity of the immune system called innate barriers, also will play a role into that. Okay, but again, this video I'm not going to get that far with it. So again, microorganisms are the simplest life form. Okay, there's usually one cell. They are grouped according to, again, what they are doing and how they can be treated. Okay, so the first one is bacteria. So bacteria is the first one we're going to look at as a microorganism. Again, it doesn't have to be a pathogen, okay, but a microorganism. Viruses. I'd probably go ahead and consider the virus to be a pathogen, okay, because usually viruses are not there to help us, okay, it's usually more a bacterial type of thing. Number 3 are fungi or fungus, okay, very simple. Protozoa would be the last one that I want to talk about in this video, but you can also have another one, a group of algae. Okay, so we're going to keep to the 4 protozoa as being kind of the last one. And also we will look at these animals, okay, like spiders and mosquitoes, things like that, that carry diseases. And these vectors we'll talk worms, will be another example we'll look at. Now, when you're thinking about the 4 main ones, okay, definitely think about what bacteria is. Okay, bacteria is very primitive. It's usually a single cell that can grow in a wide variety of environments. Okay, the study of bacteria definitely is important because in a microorganism, a lot of it, especially within our gut health, is very, very important. Okay, itself, but bacteria lives on everything. Okay, even if it's an innate object. Sorry, yes, you're an innate object. That you could actually have stuff, of course, growing on something that is not alive. So we're going to look at, of course, the diseases that kind of come through the bacterial infections. Infections, okay, so again, that's when it's going to turn into a pathogen at that point. Now, viruses, of course, are extremely small. We kind of learned that when we were talking about wearing masks and all that fun stuff. Hard to believe how long it's been. Of course, with this video that I'm videoing, it's 2024. Think about, back to 4 years ago of viruses and wearing masks, and we really started to understand that viruses have different size and how tiny they are in comparison to things like bacterial molecules. But they're very infectious, okay, and they only multiply, though, within a living cell, okay, within the living cell. Now, fungus is, of course, dealing with yeast and molds, okay. So we think of a mycotic is studying the fungus. MYC, okay, you always put an O at the end of it, refers to fungus. Okay, so that kind of helps you when you see a mycotic infection, think of mycod as being fungus or a fungal infection. And the protozoa is these single cell animals. And again, when you're studying them, we think of, again, parasites in general. Such as protozoa or even helmets, and helmets refers to worms. Okay, and of course we'll look at ticks and mosquitoes here also within. But again, most of these microorganisms are harmless outside of viruses. Okay, they're usually not trying to harm us, but unfortunately they may invade the space that we live in. Now, you definitely need to be thinking about microbiology is also using some words of microbiome. Okay, so you may have heard this word before. Okay, there's a lot more research that's coming out about microbiomes. So microbiomes is just reminding us that there's a population of beneficial microorganisms that are living on and in all around us in our daily life. Okay, that's important for you to be thinking about. So we have a huge population that grows on the body surfaces, our cavities, in your belly button. I forgot how many different bacteria live within your belly button. Okay, not to creep you out. Think the skin, our mouths, nose, digestive tract, urinary system, okay, genital region, all have a community of bacteria, fungus, and even protozoa. I know it's like, when you think about what protozoas are, okay, definitely think about worms. But we live in a balance, okay, back to that homeostasis. And that balance is what we call the microbiome of our body. Also could be called your flora, okay, normal flora. Okay. And again, these populations are very beneficial in helping break down like food residues. They also help to produce vitamin K and other nutrients that our body is definitely going to need. Now, the normal flora will protect us against a lot of infectious diseases by preventing those pathogens from even getting in our body and attaching, okay, to our body tissue and taking up space and time. The resident, okay, meaning bacteria that lives within our gut, can also produce antibodies and other chemicals to kill any microbiomes and prevent them from multiplying. Okay, of course, dividing would be the name that you would say. So, you know, even the one book that in this textbook, by estimates, it gives that in and around our body that there's an average of more than 40 trillion. Listen to that number, 40 trillion microorganisms that live in or around us. That's a lot. That's a lot of microbiome. Okay, like when I'm touching him right now, it's hard to believe how many probably microorganisms that I'm touching even on an innate object that are beneficial. Okay, beneficial to us individually. And that's why there's a lot of studies about microbiome, because of how it does vary from person to person. Okay, so definitely something maybe you might be intrigued. I'm not going to go beyond that in this video, but maybe it might be something you might want to do a little bit more research this week of what is a microbiome and the benefits it has to my body. So let's look at our first bacteria. Okay, bacteria is a single-cell organism, okay, and it's the most kind of primitive form of life on this earth. Okay, they're very unique in their genetic material, that they're not always encased with that membrane when we think about a cell, and they do not have a true nucleus. Okay, so think about that. We talked about cells. Remember, the nucleus is needed to think. Okay, also it's for reproducing. Okay, so since they also lack, beyond the nucleus, a lot of organelles, they can only be seen with a microscope. Okay, if lined up, if you take between 10 to 1,000, they would span just the tip of a pen. Okay, think about that. 1,000 of those little itty-bitty tiny bacteria might take up to that to get just on the tip of your pen. So that's pretty small. Now, staining them helps. I'm not going to get into laboratory type stuff within this class, but staining them when we're, taking stuff out of our body, obviously looking at it, trying to figure out what type of bacterial infection, that can be very useful to make their structures more visible. And also reveals a little bit of information about what I'm dealing with as far as infections. So remember, bacteria lives anywhere. Okay. Sorry, but you got lots of bacteria. Hopefully the bacteria is helping me, okay? Think of the ground, okay? Think of even cold, bacteria can live. It's kind of crazy, okay? Their requirement for water, nutrients, oxygen will vary upon what type of bacteria that we're talking about. Now, they do some of them do need oxygen, okay? Some of them don't need oxygen. You're not going to get to that level by any means within this video, but you definitely think about if they're requiring oxygen and not requiring oxygen. Of course, obviously us, where that bacterial infection is, can make a big difference. Okay, so something that would be definitely considered. Now, bacteria can also be a little bit scary, because bacteria can produce more resistant forms, okay, such as resistant to antibiotics, and also it can produce spores and spread through the air. Okay, so you think about certain conditions that, you think about, organism that of this type can definitely cause a variety of different types of diseases. Now, some of these bacteria, besides going through the air, actually many of them can actually swim through water because of the tail, the flagellum, like we talked about in a human body. That would be in the sperm, would be the tail. On that plasma membrane, but some of them can also have that tail too, okay, and can swim very kind of short distances, propel them throughout the body. So bacteria does like to crawl, okay, definitely know that. So if you have a bacterial infection in your nose, anything that's connected to that region, the bacteria can crawl down and up, okay, such as obviously if you have fecal matter, okay, in a crevice, then that bacteria from that can crawl wherever it wants to go. Okay, so it comprises the largest group of human pathogens. Okay, so kind of think about that when you think about the name. Now, as far as understanding them, the different types, okay, we're going to go by shapes. Okay, definitely important to know. So coccillus or coccilli is round. Okay, so when we look underneath a microscope, that would tell us what type of pathogen we're dealing with. Okay, so coccilli, coccillus, okay, such as staph infections. Okay, so you kind of hear that. Strep infections that looks round, okay, underneath a microscope. Now, the next type is bacilla or bacilli. Okay, So when you're thinking about this one, it looks a little bit more like a curved rod type of shape. It's got like a rod, a little bit, maybe sometimes it has a little bit of a curve to it. You could have a true, like a spiral, okay, type of rod also look. And then there are a few that kind of fall under what they call the atypical, a little bit of both, maybe a little bit round, a little bit of, you know, a length to it, okay, per se. So again, coccili, definitely need to know is round, okay. Think about a couple of conditions, such as strep, okay, and staph have the word coccili in them. Okay, so of course those would be responsible for causing anything from pneumonia to different types of fevers in our body. Bacillus, bacilli, okay, are slender rods. They can have a little bit of a taper at the end of them. And typical diseases would be something like tuberculosis, okay, would be a good example of a bacilli infection. The curved rod ones kind of look like almost like a comma, okay, and these were things like that would cause problems, or even the spiral shaped ones can cause a lot of diarrhea, stomach infections, okay, even ulcers sometimes that they can cause problems with. We think about also that, of course, they can even cause problems when they travel into the bloodstream, having some type of systemic type of infection within the body. The atypical ones, again, can cause things like rickettsia or chlamydia. Okay, so chlamydia is classified as a bacteria, although they are considerably more smaller than our normal bacteria. And the kind of the scary thing with that one, especially even when we get into, like we talk about ticks and things like that, that actually they can be caused some sexually, we think of sexual transmitted diseases can be also carried by these vectors. Okay, so again, we think of vectors, especially ticks, good example of that. Okay, so again, very important, you know, getting bit by lice and ticks and fleas, all of those can cause some of these rickettsia type diseases, or even chlamydia, and again, that's where they call the atypical type of bacterial infections themselves. So definitely, you know, using your textbook, looking at the different sizes are going to be important. Okay, you can definitely see how giant a staph bacterium is compared to when we talk about like the polo virus here in a second. So definitely know bacteria. Now the second type are viruses. Okay, so when we think about viruses, definitely know, as far as in comparison in size that they're a lot more smaller, but what makes them also different from bacteria is that they have genetic information, or they are very able to reproduce. Okay, so they have the nucleus. Okay, they definitely can think, but also because of their small size, they're very difficult a lot of times to detect within the body, because sometimes they can kind of hide, and then all of a sudden they just multiply very quickly and then overtake the immune system. So again, they consist of nucleus. Okay, they have either DNA or RNA, and it has like a protein coat that helps to protect it. They can grow only though within a living cell. Okay, so that's very important. So that's the reason why washing your hands is good, because it breaks down that outside layer, helps break apart, and helps them to deteriorate. And in the body, obviously, they can be deteriorating also within different temperatures. Okay, of course, we'll talk about fevers in the future chapters, but fevers actually will help to break down that virus within our body, hence why the body kind of resets its homeostasis. Now, they are classified, I'm not going to get any further than this within this video, but they are classified according to the type of nucleus that they contain, as far as DNA and RNA, and whether that is more of a single strand or a double strand type of design within them. Then we know we further classified them according to the disease that they cause. So obviously, you know, like HIV, okay, of course, causes AIDS. We think, of course, the coronals, they cause, of course, you know, we think of COVID-19 and other coronal viruses. Think about, of course, the flu, causes the flu. Influenza, we think about hepatitis, causes hepatitis, okay. So definitely, you know, think of, you know, the name of the disease is what usually the name of the virus is. Now, the third main type is fungus, or fungi. Okay, so remember mycotic. Okay, mycotic type of infections. When we think of that we're thinking of fungi. Okay, so it kind of rhymes in some ways. So think of yeast and mold, bread molds and things like that. Mushrooms can also fall underneath this category. Now, molds reproduce in several ways. It could be, again, spores that kind of go through the air. Okay, that's why mold can be kind of dangerous, unfortunately. We think about diseases that are caused by fungus will be a mycotic infection. Now, tinea is another word outside of that you definitely want to be familiar with. So a tinea relates to any type of fungal infection on the skin's outer layer, and it's named according to the part it affects. Okay, so think about your petals. So tinea pedis, okay, would be something that you would definitely need to know into future classes. Okay, so tinea refers to a fungal type of infection on the epidermis. Epidermis is the outer layer of the skin. Even rashes, okay, such as ringworm. Okay, ringworm is not a worm. Okay, I hate that they call it a worm, but they do. But ringworm, okay, no worms involved, is kind of ring-shaped, okay, but it's affecting certain areas, such as maybe the top of our head. Okay, I already talked about the pedis, okay, or a non-hairy surface that it could affect in the body. So definitely, back to the very first video, you definitely need to know those medical names for regions of our body. Now, the last 4 classifications are things such as protozoas or vectors. Okay, so again, protozoas, we think about amoebas in water. We also think about, we're thinking about parasitic type of conditions such as parasitic worms, better known as helminths. I always view like a little worm with a helmet on. Okay, so helminths is a medical term for worms. So think about pinworm, hookworms, all those lovely ones. Okay, of course they can cause a variety, even like tapeworms, things like that. Now, arthropods, we're thinking about vectors, so think about bed bugs, think about fleas, okay, ticks, especially, of course, mosquitoes, okay, but arthropods, that word itself just relates to like insects and spiders and mites, okay, itself. So definitely know they're vectors, okay, that they will carry diseases that unfortunately that they could give to us. So hopefully you've looked through the different diseases. Okay, within textbooks, they'll always have a big list within the chapters. At the back of the textbook, under the appendix, you'll see the huge list of a bacterial infection. So definitely know and understand. Okay, if I have a bacterial infection, the only thing that is treating it is an antibiotic. Okay, if I have a virus, I cannot use antibiotics because antibiotics only work to treat a bacterial infection. Okay, if I have a fungal infection, I definitely don't want to be treating it with antibiotics. Okay, but I need to treat it something that is not for a virus, but is for a fungal infection. Okay, like a cream or if it's a pill or whatever. Now, we think about, again, prevention. We talked about that earlier. Okay, so there are certain ways that we can help to prevent some of these pathogens from multiplying. One way is sterilization. Okay, so sterilization, you think about that one, is very extreme. Okay, so when we think about sterilization, definitely think about, again, keeping the body safe. Okay, but sterilization sterilizes an object and kills every living microorganism within it or on it. Okay, so we think about a sterile environment such as an operating room. Okay, it's totally different from sterilization. Is totally different than disinfecting. Okay, so definitely know the differences between when I sterilize something, I'm killing almost everything, where disinfecting is curing some, but it's definitely not killing everything. So we think about, spraying Lysol versus wiping it immediately off versus spraying Lysol and then me letting it sit for a while. Okay, there is a difference between the two. And then the last way is all these preventions, such as using like rubbing alcohol, washing our hands with those antiseptics, okay, type of approach. So know the difference between what sterilization is, killing everything, disinfectant, killing more. Antiseptic is not killing very much, okay, but it's helping. Okay, every bit we can help, and prevention is definitely key when we're especially cleaning our hands. Now, use some precautions. This is the chapter that gets a little bit into kind of that first aid, safety, health and safety type of information, such as, body surface precautions. We know about PPEs, okay, wearing gloves, Obviously, you know, washing our hands before and after taking our gloves. Obviously not touching a whole bunch of patients with the same contaminated glove. Always view any type of bodily fluids as a hazardous waste. Okay, it's definitely important. If you are dealing with needles, and making sure that definitely that they call them sharps, that you're not trying to recap them, that you just, you know, if you were giving a shot, then you would put the, you know, don't try to recap it, put it in the proper designated bin, okay, container. Usually they have, of course, the hazard, biohazard label, usually the red, but definitely make sure they go in a puncture-proof container itself. That is very, very important. Of course, we think about, obviously, you know, those beyond just the standard precautions, and you get into, obviously, isolation and quarantining, depending upon the condition that we're dealing with. If you have more questions, a great place to go check out would be the OSHA, okay, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Okay, so definitely go check out OSHA if you have more questions about bloodborne pathogens, okay, but also precautions needed in your field. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not getting into this particular video such as labeling the pathogens, but definitely know that, of course, like I mentioned with bacteria, that staining is very helpful, but they will use a culture. Okay, and a culture is just where, again, they use a medium to grow. So let's say you have strep, okay, and then they swab your throat. They're going to send that to, of course, the laboratory, and then they're going to grow it in a medium, in a culture dish. And then they're going to take the antibiotics, which treats only bacterial infections, and basically, you know, I say wipe it, and that's not exactly the proper term, but they're going to put it within that to see if it kills the growth of the bacteria itself. Okay, so again, especially with staining helps to see, you know, the properties a little bit better. There's, of course, the positive and the negative. Again, positive, gram-positive will stain more kind of purplish type bluish purple, get the right color out, where a gram-negative usually stains more red. And again, you're kind of looking at the difference then with bacteria between, again, if it's a round shape, curved shape, maybe with a little bit of a tip, or more like a true curved rod that look more like a comma itself. So again, identification far as viruses and stuff, obviously we're looking for the signs and symptoms that come usually with those type of conditions within our body. So hopefully within this chapter you've learned a little bit about microorganism. Definitely understanding the basics of it is important. Being able to separate the difference between, like, you know, is this disease being caused by bacteria, so then the patient could get hopefully the proper antibiotics, or is it a virus, so we can give an antiviral medicine? Is it a fungal infection, so we can treat it with antifungal medicine? And then obviously if it's a protozoa or some type of parasitic type of condition, that we can obviously get rid of the vector to help treat the condition that was caused, unfortunately, by that vector. Well, look forward to seeing you all in the next video. We might just go Lysol Manee, but maybe not, because me and him have been together for a while, so I feel like that he is helping to keep me safe, helping to strengthen, hopefully, my microbiome. Look forward to seeing you all in the next video.